Hello and welcome to the JW Thoughts channel. My name is Wally and today we are continuing our coverage of the 2022 annual meeting of Jehovah's Witnesses. Don't forget to drop a like on this video. It helps it get out to more people on YouTube. Subscribe for more further content like this, and let's do this thing.
We are living in the last of the last days.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
That means soon we are going to face events that will test our integrity as never before. Yes, now is the time that we need to be alert and decisive. Now that's a similar situation to what our brothers found themselves in the first century.
Now he does identify something interesting here. He says the people back in the first century facing something very similar to what we're facing in reference to living in the last part of the last days. But it's not that they were facing something similar. It's that they were facing the same thing. When you think about the scriptures that they use, and what these people were looking for, this generation shall not pass till all of these things have taken place. The generation that was alive back in the first century. So they've been literally saying that this is the final part of the last days. It doesn't go back to the Jehovah's Witnesses, but it goes all the way back to the early Christians. For thousands of years, people have been saying this is the end. It's right around the corner for thousands of years. At a certain point, don't you just want to say,
stop it. Get some help.
It's time to grow up. It's time to grow up and move past the silliness because you've been saying the same thing for 1,000 years. Why would I take you seriously? It's like a cult of a religion that was like, Mount Everest is going to turn into a giant rubber ducky. And for 1,000 years, they had built these communities and had been waiting with a watchful eye and instilling that fear in their children so that way they would all be ready and prepared for the day of the great duck. And it sounds silly when you put it in terms like that, but it's not that far removed from what Jehovah's Witnesses are doing, trying to instill all of this fear and anxiety even into their children. Yeah, it's right around the corner. We got to keep a watchful eye for when that big rubber duck comes about.
19. Luke 19.
Is it just me, or does every annual meeting feature some kind of shenanigans involving a governing body member and the type of Bible they're using? It seems like they're like anytime they have like a new release or a special cover, like what the heck is this thing? It's all gold on the outside with gold on the edges of the pages. Like, why does he need to be using his gold Bible? Like, have we gone full on like Joseph Smith mode here, where we're just like waving around the golden Bible and that's the way that they're actually getting the new light and only the governing body members can have a gold Bible? Like, I don't get it. Also, I'm going to just be trying to cover like relevant points and interesting things. So I'm not going to be breaking down the talks and getting everything. So it's not going to be like a series of 8 rebuttals that are all an hour long. So the annual meeting is quite long. It's about 3 hours, but we're just going to stick to mostly the relevant points.
Now maybe we could illustrate it in a modern sense. Many of us have had to face the issue with regard to blood transfusions. When do you need to make your decision with regard to that? Is it when you're in the ambulance, semi-conscious, in pain? Is it like, oh, hand me the DPA? Can you read the fine print? Or is it when you get into the emergency operating room and you start arguing with people and asking questions? No. We realize that now is the time that we need to make our decisions. Then we need to live by those decisions. And then if an emergency should occur, we'll be ready for that situation. That was the lesson Jesus was teaching them.
So I've been sitting here trying to think about this for a while, and I just can't make any sense of why they are laughing. It just doesn't seem to connect in my brain. Like, why are they laughing? This story could very easily be an emotional propaganda piece, right? We could fully see Watchtower making a video showing someone that doesn't have their no blood card filled out with the dramatic music and the saturation down to 25. It's raining. People are crying in the background. You know, everything's chaos inside of the hospital. They use some blur filter because everything's just like crazy. And Jehovah's Witnesses watching that would be very like emotional and upset about the whole thing. They'd be like, oh my goodness, what is happening? And then I realized the reason that they're laughing is that they're just going along with Geoffrey Jackson here. He's the one that's setting the tone and making a joke out of it. Like, ha ha, he, wouldn't that be insane? Wouldn't that be crazy? But his mannerisms and everything, that's what makes this funny to Jehovah's Witnesses. Because remember, this is like a life or death thing. I can't accept blood, or I won't be able to go to paradise with the rest of my family and friends. It's very serious to them. And yet it's okay if a governing body member makes a joke about it. I wonder if the opposite was true. I wonder if someone made a joke about that to Geoffrey Jackson and he wasn't the one initiating it. I wonder if he would find it funny. Or if that person, let's say he was visiting a congregation and someone used this illustration. I wonder if someone did that. If he would be giving them counsel in the back saying, you know, brother, you really shouldn't be joking about something that's so serious. Like, this is life and death here, brother. Like, what are you doing? And yet it's okay for him. I can't figure out why everyone's laughing, but I think it's just because he is allowing them to laugh at this, in their minds, very serious situation.
Most of us are familiar with what happened toward the end of 66 CE. At that time, the Roman army under the leadership of Cestius Gallus attacked Jerusalem. But unexpectedly, they retreated, allowing time for Christians in the city to flee Jerusalem. Was that the only thing that happened in the year 66 CE? No. Let's look back in time to see what other events took place. This will help us understand why Christians needed to be alert and decisive beforehand. First, let's think about the background. The Jewish nation was fed up with Roman taxation and corruption way back in Jesus' day. But by the beginning of 66 CE, the situation was even worse. The Roman governor of Judea, Gessius Florus, was totally corrupt and was notorious for his cruelty. The spirit of rebellion was everywhere. Judea was a powder keg ready to explode. Around the spring of 66 CE, Florus plundered the temple treasury in Jerusalem, stealing some 17 talents. This caused a revolt among the Jews. In retaliation, Florus ordered his soldiers to attack the rebels and allowed his soldiers to plunder hundreds of homes and to kill some 3,600 Jews. However, the Roman assault was repelled, and Florus and his men retreated from the city. If you were there at that time, how would you have reacted? Would you have been outraged by Florus's action? If you lived in the countryside, would you think the Romans may return and now was the time to flee to Jerusalem? Christians needed to be alert and decisive. Remember, Jerusalem was not important to Christians. It was not the place of safety.
I know Geoffrey Jackson here is giving us a little bit of a history lesson, but I just wanted to clarify one thing that he kind of missed, and that's a lot of the outside of Jerusalem, cities and towns in Judea and Galilee, they were also having run-ins with the Roman legions. They were killing random Roman citizens and soldiers, and obviously this was a rebellion. And for a while, they did successfully fight back and were able to lure one of the legions on the coast and were able to completely blast them. And they were like, this was a huge dubski. But then things got a little bit ugly, and that's when Nero sent, what is it, something like that, with like a full Roman legion, and just quickly and decisively wiped out all of those rebels on those outside towns. And like 10,000 Jewish people died as a consequence. So when he's saying, hey, don't return to Jerusalem, that's not the safe place to be, well, those cities on the outside weren't necessarily havens of peace themselves.
What happened next? Eleazar, the son of high priest Ananias, gained control of the temple area. He suspended the sacrifices offered to the emperor, and then drove the remaining Romans out of the upper part of the city. If you were there, would you have been proud, happy that the corrupt Romans were forced to leave? Remember though, Jerusalem was not important to Christians. It was not the place of safety. Christians needed to be alert and decisive and not distracted. Then around July, August, Menahem, the leader of another Jewish faction, overran the Roman fortress of Masada and seized Roman weapons from there. He then returned to Jerusalem and captured the tower or fortress of Antonia. They set fire to Herod's palace, the palaces of Agrippa and Bernice, as well as high priest Ananias' home. Then they ordered the murder of high priest Ananias and his brother Hezekiah. Following that, they returned to the fortress of Antonia and massacred the garrison of Roman soldiers still there. The city was divided and in uproar, so Menahem and his men escaped back to Masada. Do you see how easy it would have been to join sides with one of the factions?
Again, he's oversimplifying exactly how crazy this time was. There were, in fact, moderate leaders within Jerusalem at this time that were like, hey, we're obviously not going to get away with this. We really, really should back off of this and try and make amends with the Romans before they come in and kill everyone. And what happened to them? Well, they were just blasted by the Zealots. But there was many different factions. So he does mention of one of the factions at this time. But yeah, no, there was all of these. It was basically civil war. It's absolute chaos and pandemonium that's going on here. So it's not as simple as, well, it's the Jews versus the Romans, and that's the whole story of it. In fact, a lot of the killing, especially of the leaders, came not killed by the Romans whatsoever. It was fighting within their own factions. So the situation that he's describing is much more dynamic than he's really giving it credit for, but I just thought I'd throw that in there.
Remember though, these events were not important to Christians. They needed to be alert and decisive and not distracted. Finally, around November, Cestius Gallus, the governor of Syria, marched with his troops and camped about 6 miles from Jerusalem. Even though it was a Sabbath day, the Jewish rebels streamed out of the city and made a hasty assault on the Romans. The Romans retreated to Beth Horon, and the Jews captured Roman supplies and weapons. Agrippa sent 2 representatives, his personal friends, to the Jewish rebels to persuade them to lay down their weapons and to promise them clemency. But the rebels killed one of the men and wounded the other. Cestius pursued the rebels to Jerusalem, camped at Mount Scopus for 3 days, and then started to undermine the city wall and tried to set fire to the gate of the temple. But then, for some unexpected reason, Gallus and his army retreated. Alert Christians in Jerusalem and Judea immediately acted decisively and fled.
There was, now, instead of attributing this to be the fulfillment of some prophecy, you could look at it from a military strategic perspective, and you might be able to put some pieces together, because he didn't think he had the necessary supplies in order to have a prolonged siege. And the Watchtower's opinion on this mainly comes from what Josephus wrote about this, and basically that he should have pressed his advantage a little bit harder, because there was so many factions, and basically you're attacking a city that's undergoing a civil war, so it would be easier than you think. But his problem was, well, we're having issues with our supply line, and we're about to go into winter. Big no-no that you don't want. You don't want to be stuck somewhere going into a siege and not have adequate supply lines in your rear guard. And so many people think that that was why he actually retreated. Now, during his retreat, it was a little bit embarrassing, because then it turned into a rout as the Jewish factions were like, hey, they're leaving, and all started going and trying to wail on him. But it had a lot more to do with a lack of supplies, especially for a prolonged siege, and then issues with his rear guard and being able to get more supplies in there. After the 9 days, he was like, yeah, maybe we just need to take this thing back. But anyway, just trying to fill in the gaps of Mr. Jackson's story.
What do we learn from this brief review of the events of 66 CE? It wasn't just one event, was it? But a series of events. Were you amazed at how many events occurred in 66 CE? And that was just a brief summary. There were many divisive political and religious issues that could have been distracting to Christians. So those Christians needed to remain focused on their hope. They needed to remember that Jerusalem and its temple gave no security for them. Jesus said that these things would occur on the face of the whole earth. That means he wasn't just talking about Christians in the first century. He was talking about us today. Yes, we need to pay attention and be alert. He also reminded us to make supplication, yes, to strengthen our relationship with Jehovah. What does this mean for us today? As we face the Great Tribulation, brothers and sisters, we don't know exactly all the details of what will happen. But we do know that Jesus did not mean that we would have to flee one literal city or go to a certain mountain range. How could we? We're scattered over the whole face of the earth. But we do need to remember the same things that the first century Christians needed to remember. Don't put our trust in the religious and political systems of Satan's world. Why is this so vital? Just as in 66 CE, today we see one event after another leading up to the final day. Everywhere there is evidence of political instability and infighting, not only among nations, but also within nations. Religious, political, and social issues, including abortion and homosexuality, have become divisive topics. Scientific issues, such as global warming, have also become political issues. Just as in the first century, we must take to heart Jesus' warning. Don't take sides in the chaos that's happening all around us. Yes, keep your focus on the kingdom hope.
Here's the trick that they're playing is, hey, look at these things that were said back then, And obviously, that relates to what we're going to look forward to in the future. And this is going to sound all good and well to someone that is regularly marinating in the governing body sauce. That was a really horrible turn of expression, but I don't want to do another take. So you go throughout history and you ask yourself, okay, what has been claimed all throughout since these things were supposedly to have been written? Well, all the way back then in 66 CE, there were people that were claiming that this was when the Messiah was going to arrive. After they defeated the Romans, they were going to enter into their Shangri-La. They were going to get their paradise right then and there. Failed prophecy, right? So you can't take it and be like, well, look, the prophecy was fulfilled. No, it wasn't, because they got completely wrecked and blasted, and Jesus never had the second coming of Christ. And all throughout history, you can find so many different examples. I mean, in the 300s and the 400s and the 400, and one great one was there was someone in Rome, I can't remember exactly their name, but they predicted that Jesus was going to come in, I think it was like literally 500 CE, and that was going to be when Jesus would return. And how they calculated that it would be in 500 CE was they used the dimensions of Noah's Ark. Does that sound familiar? Yes, Charles Taze Russell used the dimensions of the pyramids of Giza in order to calculate when the end would come. Literally, every period throughout human history, or not throughout human history, but since these words were supposed to have been written, there have been people claiming that the end was coming and they were living in the time of the end. That's been for 2,000 years now. 2,000 years, people coming along. I submit to you, what's the difference of the Jehovah's Witnesses? They are one tiny little voice in this giant sea of voices that continues to put their life on hold in order to be ready for when Jesus comes back. They're willing to not engage with trying to make the world a better place, rejecting anything that has to do with politics or human freedoms. They don't want to get involved in anything like that because they need to keep on the watch. They've been keeping on the watch for 2,000 years, and my hope, my request is just give it up already. I know that it's the sunken cost fallacy here, but just stop. Stop it. Get some help. Michael Jordan, we need you in this moment right now. Stop it. Get some help, because they have been saying this for 2,000 years. Why are you going to let your life be run by some idiot that's just going to continue the same pattern? Because I promise you, when this idiot dies, another idiot is going to come behind him and say, now we're living in the last days. And when that guy dies, someone's going to come behind him and say, now we're living in the last days. Because that's what's always happened, and that's what's going to continue to happen until people reject such ridiculous ideas. All right, so we are going to cut it off here, but tomorrow we can look forward to our favorite governing body member, Tony Morris, as he has a talk for us. I haven't actually watched it yet, but I'm sure it'll be exciting, and I'll see you tomorrow.